webcast from IMA Indian Medical Association headquarters in Delhi. This is a digital IMA webcast supported by Librate and eMedin Access. Friends, you can see all this live on IMA website plus Librate and eMedin Access. You can log into them and see this webcast as usual. We are missing Dr. K.K. Agarwal today because he is abroad in an important international assignment. And as usual, we have with us Dr. R.M. Tandon, our Finance Secretary. Both of us will be asking some questions from our great friend, great ophthalmologist of Delhi, Dr. Rajendra Khanna. And he belongs to a renowned family of ophthalmologists, in fact, and he is running centers in Delhi. So we have Dr. Rajendra Khanna with us, and we will be talking about common eye problems in general practice that we face daily. So many times I believe that most of us, whenever a patient comes to about eye problem, we tell them go to an eye specialist. We don't even look into this or don't ask any question. So we'll first request Dr. Khanna to tell us what all a GP should know about various problems and what are the common eye problems that a GP can be confronted with.
So thank you for calling me here. And well, the basic problems that come to the GP is that the patient is complaining of his diminished vision, or maybe some pain in the eye or some redness in the eye. The first thing that I would suggest is, if there is a redness in the eye, look for conjunctivitis. If you are able to identify conjunctivitis, okay, then start on antibiotics. But if you are not able to identify conjunctivitis, if you feel there is a foreign body or there is some other inflammation, then kindly send to a specialist, because prescribing Pyrimon, which sometimes is given even across the counter, is very, very dangerous for the eye. It causes so many diseases in the eye, and I have seen in my lifetime, my practice time, that many people have lost their eyesight due to Pyrimon or steroid drops that you would normally get. I'm not particularly trying to mention a name, but that's probably the most popular name that is being given across the counter. So that is one thing I would like to suggest to my friends. And secondly is that if the patient is complaining of diminished vision, of course, refraction is one of them, that you have to see for the other diseases also. If supposing a patient is suffering from diabetes also, then also he can have diminished vision, because there would be some problems of the retina. So things should not be taken lightly. Whenever you have a problem which you think you cannot deal or which is overlooked, please refer the case to a specialist so that he can be treated properly.
So don't ignore any eye complaint by a GP, and don't give steroids just for nothing, just for the sake of giving any eye drop.
Yes.
These are the two issues that you want to convey to our GP friends.
Yes.
Now let's come to the eye basically. I mean, you have been in practice for 40 years now. What all in 40 years you believe that anterior chamber, posterior chamber, what all? Let's talk about anterior chamber first. And first, everything in your cataract comes in your mind once you start talking about the eye.
You see,
What is the incidence and what is the latest in cataract nowadays in the country?
previously, you see, this was
I'd just like to interrupt Dr. Khanna. Before going into the anterior and posterior camp, I'd like to ask how a general practitioner, family physician can differentiate between conjunctivitis and a foreign body redness.
You see, it is, if the eye is red, then one thing, there could be conjunctivitis, there could be a foreign body, it could be allergic also. And there are other eye problems like scleritis, episcleritis, where the eye is again red. So, if the patient does not improve in 2 to 3 days with the local antibiotic drops, I think that's the time when the patient should be immediately referred to a specialist. There is no point of waiting, because otherwise, supposing if it is iritis or iridocyclitis, then the things are going to get worse. So that is what I want to mention, that if a red eye diagnosis is a difficult diagnosis. If you can see a foreign body, if you can think you can remove it safely, go ahead. But if you feel it is embedded in the cornea and you will not be able to remove it safely, please send to the specialist. Especially the iron particles, which sometimes the welders or these people get in the eye, they should be referred to a specialist because they cause a lot of damage to the cornea.
So, that means one should try to see whether the cornea is red or not. If you find something, some kind of a damage in the cornea, then one should not treat and refer the patient.
Absolutely.
Normally in conjunctivitis, you see the whole sclera is red and the cornea may not be affected to that extent.
There is no edema on the
Right.
cornea.
So-
Okay.
So that means the cornea, if it is not affected, then patient should be taken care by the general practitioner. Otherwise, it should be referred to a specialist
Yes.
immediately, because the corneal injury, foreign body, if it is not treated at that very time, probably may lead to corneal opacity and
Corneal
other
damage.
problems.
Corneal damage.
And the commonest antibiotic you will advise general practitioners to use for eye problems.
You see, moxifloxacin is a very safe antibiotic, but in small children, tobramycin is the best option. That is non-toxic for children. Otherwise, I don't think the general practitioners should go beyond this, because leave the rest of the antibiotics to a specialist. Reason being that some of the potent antibiotics become non-potent because of the non-judicial use of the
So that means the safest and the simplest is moxifloxacin and the tobramycin.
And what
according
about
to that age.
ciprofloxacin or gentamicin drop?
You see, gentamicin, of course, was a very good drug a few years back, but because of again the non-judicial use, the rampant use, and the drug has lost its potency. Today, we find lot of cases which are resistant to gentamicin.
Yeah.
So that is why if the drug is misused over a period of 4 to 5 years, it loses its efficacy.
While we are talking about conjunctivitis, the very common problem where a patient will complain, I have itching in my eyes. What is the treatment for the itching of eye?
Look, basically, due to the pollution in the city, especially if I am talking about the metros, I think the best thing should be to ask the patient to wash with clean water. That's the best thing. If still it persists, I think a histaminic, antihistaminic should be given.
The oral or drops?
No, drops.
Drops.
On the form. There are a lot of drops that are available as far as the itchings are concerned. I wouldn't like to go into the great names, but there are plenty of them available. So those are general drops, they can be given. And if the patient does not improve with that, then he should be immediately referred to a specialist to assess what is the type of allergy.
And from your side, steroid should not be prescribed by
Never.
general practitioner?
Never.
That is a very important message for you.
We have small kids having spring catarrh, which is a very common problem. I think about 6 to 7% of the kids are suffering from spring catarrh. And I feel that I see a lot of them coming to us with loads of steroids being given to them, and they are having glaucoma, high pressure, and sometimes even cataract at a very young age. So this is something which should be avoided by the general practitioners, and I feel that steroid in the eye should only be in the jurisdiction of a specialist. This is what I feel.
That's true. Now we come to the NCA chamber and the problem.
Yeah, basically the most common thing that we have is cataract, which was once the biggest cause of blindness in India, but due to the programs of the different governments, of course now this is not the biggest cause of blindness, but still there's a lot which has to be done in this factor. Cataract basically is the clouding of the clear lens. Basically, when God gave us birth, He gave us a clear lens. And over a period of time, that lens becomes opaque. Average age, which was considered about when I was studying in medical college in 80s, the average age was considered to be 60 to 70. But these days, we are finding that in cases in age of 35 to 40, there are a lot of people who are getting cataract. I do not know though what exactly is the cause, but I feel that polluted food that we are eating, the junk food that we are eating, or probably the unhealthy lifestyle that we are having in the metros and other places is
Environmental
pollution This could be the factor for early onset of cataract these days. Because many of the times you are surprised to see a young person of 40 years having a cataract, full blown cataract. So this is some thing of concern, and I think medical fraternity solidly would try to examine what is the cause and try to remove the cause. But
But once you talk about cataract, I believe I reminded of your father, senior Dr. Khanna, who did around 6 lakh surgeries in his lifetime, all free. And those are the times when people can go to the railway station, people are waiting there, just do it and come back.
Yeah.
Those are the days, but things have changed, the whole system has changed, the whole algorithm has changed. So now what is the, I mean, if a person comes to me of a middle age and says, I have a cataract, then what is the best treatment, I mean, the best form of treatment you can give to that person?
You see, actually, we try to take cataract as a single modality. That cataract means just surgery. Every cataract is different. Every cataract, a congenital cataract is different, a senile cataract is different, a metabolic cataract is different. So every cataract has to be treated in a different category. Though, of course, many of the steps are the same. But then again, we have to take precautions of all the problems. Latest these days that we are doing is phaco, small incision surgeries. In peripheral areas, they are doing non-phaco small incision surgeries, which are very, very successful. In metros, most of the time, it is the micro-incision surgeries that we are following. But these days, even laser fematosurgeries have also come up. So, they are little costly. But I feel, if you take it as a whole gambit, I think micro-incision cataract surgery is the best surgery these days. Affordable and with a good lens, good foldable lens, it gives you very good results in majority of the cases.
It has a fast recovery.
Fast
and after effects, there are no after effects, you can do your normal activity in a few hours or days, whatever.
I think you see the total recovery time that normally I see in my cases is about 48 to 72 hours. Even sometimes it was called in walk-in surgery and walk-out surgery. And there was time when people used to go to office the same day. But that we are trying to avoid because of the pollution in the city and the unhygienic conditions in the busy city. At least I don't advocate that. But I think after 72 hours the patient is fighting fit and he can go to his office, attend his work.
Then there are two things like just to make clear myself. You said the microsurgery without phaco in the periphery.
No, small incision.
A small incision
Yes.
without phaco.
Yes.
What is that? How they are performing that small incision surgery without phaco?
Normally, you see, what we are doing is we are trying to fragment the lens inside the eye with the phaco
Right.
and
then
sucking out the
Right.
small pieces.
Right.
But what small incision cataract surgery means is we are making an incision which is about 5.5 or 6 millimeters. In phaco, we are making an incision of sub 2 millimeters. But here they make an incision of 5.5 or 6 millimeter. And with the techniques that they have developed over the time, they are bringing out the whole nucleus in a single, the whole nucleus. And then the rest of the lens matter, they can be absorbed, can be sucked out in any way you want. And that is a very good procedure that has been developed and it is being done all over the periphery. And peripheral hospitals, they are getting good results as good as phaco, even with a small incision.
Small incision. So they are applying sutures and with 5-6 millimeter at a suture.
No, they are not applying sutures. Only in case if they find that the wound is leaking and the wound is not stable. Because there the step of wound construction is very important. So it's a self-sealing wound. But if the wound construction is not proper, then they give 1 or 2 sutures to stabilize the wound.
That is what is important.
Yes.
So that means that both the techniques are very good.
Both the
with
techniques
small
are good.
incision and as is being done
No,
in
but
periphery.
recovery is definitely faster with micro-incision.
Micro incision and phaco.
And no, this micro-incision is phaco.
Okay.
Or femto.
Fermento
Femto
is
again,
high.
this is a high-end surgery.
High-end surgery and too expensive for everyone. What is exactly the cost of this?
I think approximately, if you put it, it's anything above 80,000.
Above 80,000. That means from 1.3 lakhs it has come to 80,000 now.
Yeah.
It was initially it was 1.3.
Absolutely. You see, I'll tell you, if the technology keeps developing, if a lot of people start accepting it, then definitely the cost will start. You see, the initial FECOs used to cost very high, but now
With everything
the
is
cost is
done.
balancing out.
And another question about the cataract. But there is a word coming, posterior polar cataract, where there are risks involved in surgery.
Tremendous risk involved in surgery. If you diagnose that you are dealing with a posterior capsular cataract, you have to get your VR setup ready immediately. That means another surgeon who is expert in dealing with vitreoretinal surgery should be ready, because you can have an accident on the day. So if you are not having a backup of a VR surgeon, then I think posterior polar cataract should not be touched. It should be touched only at the centers where there is a VR backup, because 50% chance is there that you will have an accident.
So that is a clear message. If somebody advises that you have a posterior polar cataract, then one should select a place where the vitreous surgery can be done immediately if there is a need.
What are
So
the
that is a
risks
message
and
very important.
What are the risks? Hemorrhage?
The
No.
vitreous prolapse.
No, as soon as we start doing the surgery, the whole nucleus and the lens matter go back into the vitreous, and fish it out from the vitreous cavity. And if you are not trained for
Expert
that,
enough to do
yeah,
it.
if you are not expert enough, or if you are not trained for that, then you will end up in a mess. That's it. Then we lose sight.
So that is very important
That's
message
very
for
important.
every-
But I think general practitioners cannot judge whether there is
No,
a
They are not diagnosis. If suppose somebody comes with a posterior polar cataract to them, they should also advise that it should be done only where
because it
vitreous
can only be diagnosed by a eye surgeon.
I said, that is true. But they should know that this is
Another
very
query
important.
on cataract is, when people, when we were studying, they used to say, let it get mature, hyper mature, only then we'll operate. But nowadays, some people are doing, even in the initial stages of cataract, that they are advising operation. should be done.
Absolutely right. This is a very good question. And now, you see, if you let your cataract mature, it becomes difficult to bring it out with a phaco,
Hard.
or because it becomes harder. And then you have to use more phaco energy, which is damaging the cornea also. And at that age, the corneal cells, the internal cells of the cornea, they are also less in number. And if you damage them more, the percentage, supposing if you damage about 20% of your cells, then the vision is again compromised. So it is always better to get when it is softer. Again, there also the discretion is that you should get it as soon as you start feeling the difficulty. There is no point of waiting. Supposing a person is driving with even a small cataract and he is dazzled with the lights that are coming
The right, that is a very
on the
important
road from the traffic, so that he becomes accident prone. So he should not wait. He should immediately. Plus, there are other professions where you require good sight. And supposing you are working with a compromised eyesight and straining yourself, that's not a good thing. So it's always advisable. As soon as you start feeling difficulty in your daily routines, go ahead, get a cataract done. Don't wait for it to mature.
That means a very good symptom you have told, that people will complain that they are having problem while driving in the night. They are probably developing a cataract and they should immediately consult an ophthalmologist and get it treated, because they can run into a problem for self and for the others on the road.
Because
In the meantime, I'll tell my viewers that you can ask your questions via SMS or mail. Mail, just you know it, and there's a live webcast. And you can send an SMS to me, text message at 9810118256. Please note 9810118256. Any questions from Dr. Khanna, please send us a message. Thank you.
and this next question.
So let's here comes
That's the question. And the other thing, when we were discussing previously, that you said that the cataract is developing at the early ages now. I think the diabetes is also playing a big role in developing a
Absolutely right, because you see, I don't know what the figure was about a couple of years back, but WHO report now says there are about 12 to 15% diabetic cases as far as the metros of this country are concerned. That's a big concern and that's a big number. And I feel that this 15% that the WHO is mentioning is again a little less than what I am expecting or what I am seeing in my opinion. So diabetes is one disease which is coming up because of lifestyle, because of adulterated food, because of a lot of other things, and should be taken care of by proper persons. And whenever there is a diabetes, whenever a general practitioner gets a case of diabetes or diagnoses a case of diabetes, the first thing that he should do is send that patient for a fundus examination. That is it. That is the bottom line. Let us have the fundus examination of today. Later on, supposing the changes come, then at least we'll have that record, that first day record as to what the fundus was on
The diagnosis.
on the diagnosis day. And if the position in the fundus, in the retina is deteriorating, then at least the retinal surgeon or the eye specialist can take care of that and will not let the person become blind. Because diabetes, one thing that I want to mention to my friends is that whatever damage is caused is permanent. Whatever is left, you can try to save that. Again, the word that I am using is try to save that. You cannot guarantee that you can save that, but still you can try to save that. And you can try to save the vision. So diabetes is one disease which should not be taken casually by the general practitioners, and every time you get a case of diabetes, send for the fundus examination, and this fundus examination, if the diabetes is under control, should be at least once a year, and if it is not under control, it should be every 6 months or whenever the patient complains, whenever the patient has any specific problem. This should be, I think, a thing which should be followed by as a protocol by all general practitioners.
And then you are right, Dr. Khanna, diabetes can affect the cornea, the lens, the vitreous, the retina, the nerve,
Every part of the eye, every part, starting from the glands.
Yeah.
The eyelids are affected by diabetes. The patient starts having the watering because the tear film that is formed during diabetes or other endocrinological diseases, that is not healthy and that does not stand. So patient starts suffering from dry eyes. And starting from there to the cornea, to the lens, you can get early cataract. Even in few cases of diabetes that I have seen, if there is a superimposed infection, they get iritis also. The diabetics are more prone to all diseases because their internal resistance probably is so low that their immunity is so low. Glaucoma can also be caused because if the new vessels, new vascularization is again another feature of diabetes, and if new vessels start appearing in the angle of the eye, they will cause blockage, and this is called neovascular glaucoma, and it is totally because of diabetes, and this is one of the very serious problems, and it is very difficult to treat. So if diabetes is not treated properly, I can have a lot of problems. Though these neovascular glaucoma occur very late, after say about 20 years or 25 years of standing of diabetes, they don't occur on the first day. But if we are not careful on day one, then at least we are looking down the barrel of the gun, and we are eventually have to face the problem someday or other.
There is a question from Dr. Rajinder Kaur. Please let me know if ketamine administered to the patient can lead to retinal hemorrhage and hence can be the reason to the blindness of the person. Please discuss as ketamine is very frequently used. Can ketamine induce secondary glaucoma also?
Hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage.
Well, frankly speaking, there is no study which has been done on that, but I'm not sure about this.
Can ketamine induce secondary glaucoma?
It can. That it.
Okay.
That's a very important question, but nowadays ketamine is not so commonly used in bigger hospitals, but still ketamine used to be a very common drug for anesthetizing the small kids for smaller surgeries, so ketamine for other small procedures, daycare, OPD procedures. It was very commonly used. But I think Dr. Lesson, this question must have seen cases of blindness or of glaucoma after the ketamine use. But I think that thing should be correlated with ketamine or pre-existing disease of the retina, because I'm sure before giving ketamine, no one is going for fundus examination or for that matter for any eye examinations. So probably something might be persisting in the eye, and ketamine is known to cause some problem with the vessels, and that can be the reason, maybe causing blindness.
No, I have not come to any study that specifically mentions ketamine as a cause of retinal hemorrhage. But pressure, of course, raises, and that is why we try to see that it is a short duration surgery where we are using ketamine, so that the pressure does not rise for a very long time. So once ketamine it is withdrawn, then again the pressure does come down. So it does not cause a permanent rise of pressure. But if suppose we are going for a prolonged surgery, then of course, then we have to address the pressure also in those cases. Then we have to keep monitoring the IOP
I
also.
think if you are done with cataract, we can talk about corneal obesity and the blindness because of that and what all we do.
Corneal obesities, yes, they are because of improperly treated ulcers, most of the time, or because of industrial injuries. Improperly treated ulcer, it is very unfortunate in our country that when the agriculture season comes, there is a lot of husk in the air, and that causes a lot of fungal infections which are not treated well in the periphery. Again, the steroids are the main culprits in that. And fungal ulcer is an entirely different type of ulcer, and it is not a bacterial ulcer, and there are entirely different medicines for those fungal ulcers. So I think the general practitioner should be well versed in their areas to treat a fungal ulcer. And if they are not well versed with the treatment of a fungal ulcer, I think they should be immediately sending the patient to a proper specialized center. Because fungal ulcer is very common in the peripheral areas, in the villages and in the agricultural area. A general practitioner should go through a small course as to how to treat a fungal ulcer. It's not difficult. There are few medicines that you have to be given, and you can very well control the fungal ulcer. But if you are not able to control it, even sometimes we lose eyesight and completely lose the eyeball also. Because if the cornea melts completely, then you just have nothing left. Second thing is about the corneal obesity is the viral effects. If the viral ulcers again are not treated properly, if the KPs are not treated properly, then again they can lead to permanent obesities on the eye. So viral ulcers, again, steroids are contraindicated. One should not give steroids. They are going to flare up the whole thing. So viral again is a specialized job. Viral, I don't think everybody can treat, so you have to send to a specialist. Bacterial ulcers, of course, you can treat with normal antibiotics that I have told you. Moxifloxacin is a very good antibiotic, and in younger kids, tobramycin. And they respond well also. But again, you should know your limitations. As and when you feel that it is not coming under control, please don't have an ego in sending that patient to a specialist.
It's very
important.
Basically,
It's a very important thing. I think everybody should know. When and for how long one can treat ulcer without creating any problem in future? For how long?
You see, I feel probably let us give it a time frame that if for 3 to 4 days, if it is not coming under control, then I think it's time that one should start thinking that it is not what he is thinking, and let the specialist do his job. But if it's coming under control, still I think 1 week time should be sufficient, and if it's not curing, then he should be sent to a specialist immediately.
Okay. There is any small signs and things you can tell them how to differentiate between the viral, fungal, and bacterial ulcers.
Basically, viral ulcers, they can be only seen on specific machines like slit lamp or something. Yeah, sometimes they are not even visible to naked eye. So very difficult to diagnose. This is why I am saying viral ulcers are very difficult to diagnose. The fungal ulcer, if somebody is seeing it say regularly, so he will be able very well diagnose it from a bacterial ulcer. Bacterial ulcers are different, entirely different. Their size, the shape, the color, they are absolutely different from a fungal ulcer. Fungal ulcer is looking at as like a dirty ulcer. So when you see that dirty look on the eye with a cavitation, I think that is the time when you should consider it as a fungal ulcer and start treating as a fungal ulcer. And in the periphery, I would definitely suggest the general practitioners to know how to treat a fungal ulcer, because sometimes the patient is very reluctant to travel to the city or to a specialist. So they should know how to treat a fungal ulcer so that at least they can give the basic, they will save the eye from getting blind. Most of the time when we get, it is in the fourth stage or fifth stage where we are not even able to help the patient.
So what will be the safest advice to give patient when you suspect even a fungal ulcer?
You see, itraconazole drops are available, itraconazole ointment is available. You can even go for fluconazole also. So these are the two specific medicines that should be given in fungal ulcer.
And these two drugs will not cause any
damage.
If it is a bacterial or viral.
A viral ulcer. This is what I am saying. They will not cause any damage.
That is the safest bet in a periphery where the husk is there and it is likely that the patient can have a fungal infection, fungal ulcer in an eye. They can prescribe antifungal drops to a patient without having fear.
Without having fear.
Yeah. But is it possible to all the time diagnose ulcers, corneal ulcer on a naked eye?
No. Sometimes you have to stain them, sometimes you have to see them on slit lamp and other machines, because it is sometimes not possible to identify a corneal ulcer directly with the naked eye.
So then how and when they should suspect that there can be ulcer and they should send the patient to the specialist?
Now, this is a difficult question. Actually, whatever the complaint of the patient, if the practitioner feels he is not able to address in 2 to 3 days, I think he should immediately send him to a specialist.
I think what I feel that the take-home message for general practitioner is, if suppose they give any kind of history of a foreign body or an injury to the eye, they should not treat. Just put a pad and send it to the specialist for the better treatment.
That is one option.
That is the one.
In cities, it is the best.
That is because there should not be any confusion in their mind that what they should treat and what they should not treat.
Whatever happens, I think the only thing that they should restrain from is giving steroids, because steroids worsen the situation. Yeah, the ulcer flares up.
So a steroid is a banned drug for general practitioners.
Absolutely.
They should not use it.
They should not.
So that is a message from Dr. Khanna. Steroid is a banned ointment for general practitioner for eye. You use anywhere you like, but don't use it on the eyes.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Khanna, coming to, I believe, to glaucoma. So many people come to a general practitioner, severe pain here, redness of the eye. And most of us are really not able to diagnose because we don't know anything about it. We cannot take examination, the tension and everything. So, a word about glaucoma, GP should know. Because sometimes people come to us whether this medicine is to be given, whether these drops are given, how effectively are they, how frequently they should be given. These are a few questions I think a GP should know. Once the patient comes back from a ophthalmologist and shows you the prescription.
You see, fortunately, when I passed out from my medical college, there was only one drop, pilocarpine. There was nothing else. And but you see, I am fortunate to see an era where we have so many eye drops which can control intraocular pressure. So, from my time, we have traveled a lot as far as glaucoma is concerned. You see, travoprost drops, they should be given once a day. And there is another drop, brinzolamide. This should be given twice a day. Tamrol maleate There is again another drug which is very commonly given, but then it should be given very judiciously. If a patient is having an asthma or any cardiac problem, then Tramadol should be avoided, because it is proved that it can affect the beta blockers and can cause problem. So basically there are much safer drugs. The brenzolamide is one of them, dorzolamide is another one, and bromonidine eye drops are another one. So they all are good enough, and most of the doses are twice a day. They should be given twice a day. Whenever a patient, supposing if he is being treated in a metro and goes back to his, and he cannot travel so frequently, so what the practitioner should do is first see that the patient is complying with those drops, and second, he should know how to measure the pressure digitally. That is one common thing. If he finds that the eyeball is a little harder measuring it digitally, then I think he should ask the patient to again have a visit. And in any case, in any glaucoma case, I think 2 months or 3 months maximum, the patient should visit his doctor to review the case. There are certain tests that have to be repeated in glaucoma, and the general practitioner should know that fields, and today with the high technology, OCT, are mandatory every year. Whether there are changes, whether the glaucoma is progressing or not progressing, but these are mandatory, these should be done. The fields and OCT. Because by that, today we can see the functional and the structural integrity of our eye as far as glaucoma damage is concerned. If there are changes in the field, we know there is functional deterioration. If there are changes in the OCT, then we see that there are structural deteriorations. So these two things should be done annually in all glaucoma cases. And the practitioners, if they have a case of glaucoma, following up with them, should always advise or send back their patient every year for these two tests. The other tests are, of course, not mandatory, but then gonioscopy, etc., have to be done. But those are in the initial stages of diagnosis, and they have to be done regularly to see what is the progress of glaucoma. So these are the tests which only a specialist can do.
There used to be some tablets also, Diamox,
That is
long-term
pressure.
Long-term therapy of these tablets is not advisable. But yes, supposing if a patient is not able to come in the next couple of days and he is having some problem, I think for 2 to 3 days or 4 days maybe, these tablets can be given to the extent of 4 tablets a day to control the patient.
That's all.
Yeah.
And when to think about an operation in these cases?
You see, basically, the treatment schedule or the protocol is that a patient, if it comes under control, a good control, with 2 drugs therapy, then he should not be considered for surgery. But if 2 drugs are not enough to control, then the patient should go for a TRAB. Now here, let me tell you that even TRAB is not a 100% assured treatment for glaucoma. Even TRABs fail. So we have to repeat TRABs. But we are fortunate that we are born in an era where there are valves and shunts. So if the TRAB fails, then we should go for a valve or a shunt. Or supposing if we are treating a case of rubiosis, that was a diabetic glaucoma that I was mentioning. Here we know that 95% of the time the TRAB would fail. So here I think the first treatment of choice would be to put a valve, the glaucoma valve. So that gives you a good result. And the basic protocol is that if 2 drugs are not sufficient, then you go for surgery. Go for TRAB. And if your TRAB is not sufficient, you go for a valve. This is the protocol that we found.
Very important thing. 2 important features which GP should note to suspect glaucoma.
You see, initially when a patient does get glaucoma, he gets a vague type of headache and a vague type of pain or stretchiness in the eye. The eye he just complains of heaviness in the eye. That is one point. Second point is that if he starts seeing halos around the bulbs or lights, that is the time when one should suspect that he has a glaucoma. Frequent change of spectacle numbers is another reason. And there are certain diseases, like if the patient is a chronic hypertensive, if the patient is having thyroid, if the patient is having diabetes, he should be always suspected that he is a candidate who can have glaucoma at any stage.
But the important thing is that means frequent change in number,
Yeah.
persistent headache not getting treated, and halos around the bud. These are the common
Common.
complaints one should realize and suspect and send to the specialist for the diagnosis of
If the
glaucoma.
patient is complaining of halos, I think there is
No doubt about
no doubt about it.
So that is a very important take-home message for all family physicians, rather for all doctors other than ophthalmologists, that halos around the bulb is the cardinal sign of glaucoma, and they should refer such patient to avoid blindness because of glaucoma.
No, I'll add 1 minute to it. Why do halos occur? Because of high pressure, the cornea is impregnated with fluid drops. Now these are the drops which are causing the halos. They cause the rain.
And what is the cause of blindness in glaucoma?
You see, it is the asphyxiation due to the high pressure, or even in some of the normal pressure glaucoma cases. It is the suffocation of the nerve behind, the optic nerve behind. It may be due to the high pressure, because if the pressure is high, the circulation of that nerve is impaired, and that nerve is suffocated. And gradual suffocation of that nerve leads to blindness. Normally, we have a pressure which is above 25, which is suspected to cause this. But in recent stages, we have seen that even pressures of 22 and 23 can cause this suffocation. So these are also called normotensive glaucomas, or even sometimes at the pressure of 14 or 15, this suffocation can occur. So these are called low tension glaucomas. So basically, we have to keep a very close watch on the nerve and the function. That is why I said the function and the structure have to be measured regularly. So even today, we are finding that in a pressure as low as 14, we are getting glaucoma cases. So we have to even reduce the pressure further to something like 9 or 10 to keep the nerve healthy. Basically, we have to save that nerve. We have to save that light ear of the patient. Even with the best of treatment, there would be 1% or 2% damage every year. So what we are doing with the treatment of glaucoma is that we are trying to increase the light years. We cannot cure this disease. Again, let me tell you, friends, that we cannot cure this disease. We can only increase the light years in the case of glaucoma. So that if the person, if untreated, would have gone blind at 65, we would keep his light till 95. That is what we are doing with the treatment.
Okay, that's good. So, there can be people with normal tension in the eye and still
have glaucoma.
suffering from
Yes.
glaucoma and ultimately into some type of some degree of blindness. Okay, I think we have done with the anterior part of the eye, and now when we talk about the posterior part of the eye, in fact, before we go there, some young people come to us for eye surgery for treatment of their refractive
Myopia.
errors, myopia and metropia. We are at a loss. We sometimes go for it, sometimes don't go for it. What are your, to our young listeners and to our GPs also, how to talk to them, to their patients, and whether it is required, how effective it is, what is the lifespan of a operated examiner or whatever you have. These are a few questions you should know it.
Okay, let me start. This is a cosmetic surgery. That is the first thing. Optional. You can do with glasses. You can do well with glasses. So this is optional. So it's not that it's absolutely necessary. There are people who want to go into different jobs, like police, railways, where they cannot get in with spectacles. They will ask you for these surgeries. But let me tell you one thing. It is again, though very fairly we get very good results, but again, it's not 100% sure surgery. There could be problems. There could be people who may not get 6/6 vision even after this surgery. Again, everybody is not a candidate for this surgery. It's not that anybody who has a number can walk in and get this surgery done. The patient has to be meticulously examined. The cornea has to be examined, whether that cornea is strong enough to sustain that surgery or not. That if we don't measure that cornea, if we don't measure that strength, we will land up in problem in a couple of years. Secondly, the retina should be okay. Supposing the retina is so weak that there are holes on the retina or the lattices on the retina, and if we perform this surgery, the patient will have further problems and eventually even the site can be damaged. So one should not always promise 100%, we should not be promising the person a moon. There are problems in this surgery. It has to be meticulously examined. But after having said that, yes, it is an option. It is a scientific option. And it has been there for last 20 years now. And we are getting good results. Most of the cases are happy, but there are some grumbling cases also.
So is there a limitation? I mean, I'll say like a six diopter is the deficiency in the eye.
Yeah.
When they should go, it is even
No.
partial access.
Any amount of
Any.
diopter, any amount
Any.
of diopter, depending on what the thickness is. But of course, we have a cutoff line. We normally don't do LASIK beyond 9 because now we have other options also. There is a lens called ICL, intracameral lens. We can put in, or implantable contact lens, you can call it, to be very precise. And this can be implanted inside the eye. So here we can go to the number of, to the diopters of 27 or 28 or 29 without structurally damaging the eye. So LASIK, we are structurally molding the eye. So there is some tissue loss. But in ICL or IPCL, there are two companies which are manufacturing. The structural damage to the eye is not there. We are just placing that lens, whatever spectacle we had to place outside the eye, we are placing that lens right inside.
And the other thing is that age bar for getting all these surgery from
No,
any age.
Any age. Only criteria is that your retina should be healthy and you see, normally what you are talking about is whether the person above 50 should go for this surgery or not.
No, my idea is whether the person of 14, 15 years should opt for a surgery.
No,
That's what-
the bottom line is 18 years.
80. That's what.
That's the bottom line. And it can go any the age. But normally after 40, we don't prefer to go for this surgery because the person has a presbyopic effect also. So he will get one type of the glass or the other. Yeah, we are trying that we should be able to do a presbyopic LASIK. But till date, we have not found a very good or a solution that we should be offering to our patients for presbyopia. So that is one thing. Plus, then I told you, most of the diseases start at this age. At 40, you start getting cataract, you may be getting glaucoma, you may be getting other problems. So doing this surgery unnecessarily invites criticism. That he says, I got this because I got this surgery. So that unnecessary criticism for
Those
us.
are the negative points.
Those are the negatives.
But once it is done at a young age and the person is completely cured, do you think it doesn't recur or
In 5% cases, it does come back.
It does come back.
Especially, in girls, etc. Whenever during pregnancy they have hormonal bursts or they have hormonal changes in the body, sometimes the cornea, the elasticity of the cornea is also lost, and sometimes they do get the number back. There are other problems also. There is a thing called keratoconus. Sometimes it is during our first examination, we may miss that keratoconus and we do a surgery, refractive surgery on that case. So if you have missed it somehow, then there are chances that that person may get the number again, and then that number may be even more than what he was previously. So we have specific treatments for those cases. Those cases are real disaster cases. So that is why I told that meticulous examination of the eye is a must before we go for this.
So a message for a family physician that if somebody comes to you for this, you must advise them in the right way. Don't give 100%
Assurance.
guarantee
Yes.
for anything. And let the ophthalmologist decide what is to be done and what is not to be done and when it is to be done. What are the indications and what are the complications. Everything I think should be.
The catch statement is that yes, dependence on glasses will reduce. But if you promise the moon that you will get 6/6 vision or you will get eagle eye vision, that is, I think, wrong. We should not be promising that.
Yeah.
And below 18, don't ask anybody to go to ophthalmologist.
Yes.
That is also
No,
important.
no, don't say that. Otherwise, ophthalmologists will do it.
For vision correction.
For this,
For vision correction. We're talking about the posterior
Now
campus.
is the main part of the story is your retina. Let us what are the when a person should come to you, loss of vision, whatever it is, and what are your guidance about retinal care in most of these people?
you see, there are 2-3 diseases where a person should be regularly coming to an ophthalmologist. I told thyroid, I told hypertension, I told diabetes. Reason being, in hypertension, because sometimes the blood pressure is so high that the vessels burst. So once they have burst, then at least we have lost something. Maybe we will be able to recover after the absorption of blood. We will be able to recover a good amount of eyesight. But then still something has been lost in the eye. A small area must have been lost. So if we are able to send these cases regularly to an eye specialist, and if they can keep advising the patient as to what should be done at regular intervals, I think we would be saving many eyes from disaster. So this is one thing that I would suggest as far as retina is concerned. Secondly, if the patient is very high myopic, he should also be, even if he is having no problem, he should also have a regular checkup every year. At least once a year is absolutely essential for a myopic, because there are a lot of things that can happen it's a dynamic eye. A myopic eye, I call it a dynamic eye, because there are a lot of changes that keep happening in the myopic eye. There can be hole formation, there can be lattice formation, and because of some reason, even a small trauma can cause a detachment. So all myopic eyes should always be having 1 year examination, and if they have any specific complaint, they should be immediately sent to a specialist, and not just a change of number given and you feel that the job is done. No, that is not done. We should be checking the whole retina completely in myopic eyes.
There are two things. When you said high myopia,
High.
what is the criteria of saying high myopia?
I think anybody who is above 8 is supposed to be high.
8. 8 plus means that it should go
But
down.
even no, that would be a very wrong signal that would be sending. Even a 2 diopter case can get a lattice or something. But high myopic, it is a must. The other cases should also get their retina checked up, but then that is not so frequently. But high myopics every year.
Every year.
Yes.
But otherwise, all myopic should get at least fundus examination.
Say after 2 to 3 years, yes, they should.
That is important. Because there are chances of getting retinal detachment.
But some people said there is a hole in the retina, and what does that signify? And is there any treatment available to correct whatever damage to the retina has occurred?
You see, basically, if the damage has occurred, it has occurred. This is what I told. Retina is such a delicate organ, it contains sensitive nerves, that once a damage is occurred, it is occurred. So what we can only do is salvage what is left. If there is a hole, there are treatments for that. Initially, we used to do cryo on that hole, but these days we laser it out. We laser it out and we put 3 layers of laser around it. In layman language, I will call that we weld it. We weld it that it does not progress. And once it is welded, these holes behave well, they don't cause further damage, and it's okay. But then, again, it is not a guarantee that the hole would not occur in another place. It is possible that if you have welded it at one place, it can there could be a fresh hole in the other place. I will give an example to a corroded water pipe that flows in your home. Supposing it starts leaking from one point, and if you just patch it up there, it can start leaking from the other point. So that is what keeps happening. So that is why these eyes need a regular examination.
And what about vitreous hemorrhage if you have?
Vitreous hemorrhages, 50% of the times they are self-resolving. Most of them they resolve themselves. But if they are not resolving, any vitreous hemorrhage which is more than 2.5 months old, I think vitrectomy should be done and immediately their blood should be removed. We should see the leaking vessel, and if the leaking vessel is still leaking, then immediately endocoagulation. Right inside the eye, a probe should be put and that vessel should be coagulated right there, so that fresh bleeding is stopped. There is no fresh bleeding and it should be stopped, so that the eye should be saved from becoming blind.
You mean in most of the cases this can be really corrected?
Yeah, this can be. I told you, 50% of the cases they are self-resolving also. So if they don't resolve by themselves, I think we should only wait for about 2.5 months. That is it. And otherwise we should go for surgery.
Okay. I think we are into the last 5 minutes of it. What about camp surgeries? You know, there were times when there were lots of surgeries everywhere on the street, in the schools and every place. Now, even now we keep hearing that in a district in Haryana, there was a camp surgery, surgeries in a camp and so many people lost their eyesight. Or in Bihar, there have been cases like this in the recent past. So what is your opinion about these camp surgeries, whether they should be held, they should not be held, and if at all they should be held, what are the precautions?
You see, my father was a pioneer of camp surgeries, and I would say, not being biased, but camp surgeries have to be done in our country where the large amount of population does not have a reach to a good eye center or good, they cannot even, hundreds of miles of radius, there are no hospitals. So camp surgery has to be done. But yes, we have to set the guidelines. It should be proper, the OT maintenance should be proper. Whatever OT they do, it should be properly fumigated before any surgery is performed in that. Those are the protocols that should be followed. But let me tell you something. Cases do get blocked up in higher centers also, but nobody speaks of them. Camp surgery, of course, whenever we have a blotch-up, there is a cluster infection. So they come into limelight. These blotch-ups are not always due to the negligence of the doctor. There could be a certain saline which is supplied by a certain company which we believe that is sterile, and it may not be sterile. No, there is no way by which I can see that it is sterile or it is not sterile. There are certain chemicals that we are using in the eye during our surgeries these days, viscoelastics that we are using. We believe that the company which is saying that it is sterile may not be sterile. So there are a lot of factors, and immediately trying to blame a doctor for that, I think is very, very bad. No. The doctor who has gone there has gone there with a good intention of serving the people. Yes, it is possible that he may have lost up something, but then there are other factors also. So I think before we evaluate all the circumstances in a camp surgery, we should not be blaming anybody. And stopping camp surgery, no, I don't think. We should be having camp surgery, yes, with the proper support.
Do you think government has formed guidelines for holding camps?
Yes,
But
it has.
still they are being followed in most of the camps?
I will not say most of the camps, but I say majority of the camps. Majority of the camps do follow government guidelines. Even the district administration is very careful. They do check up whether the guidelines are being followed or not. You know, when my father used to conduct camps, yes, the district magistrates used to come with a list to see if those things are being performed or not. But after having said that, yes, sometimes when we try to make compromises with the place or situations or something, then things do happen.
Okay. Last word about corneal transplant.
Yeah, corneal transplant, when of course the opacity is there and the person is not able to see, that is one thing which we can do, but the eye has to be stable for that, and we have to evaluate whether the retina is okay or not. If the retina is not okay, there is no point of wasting an eye, because donations are less and the people who need transplant are more. So if the retina is functional, if the retina is good, we can go for the corneal transplant, and it does save a lot of sight. And I feel general practitioners have a very big role in motivating the patients to donate eyes. And we are still not self-sufficient as far as the eye donation of eyes are concerned. There are a lot of backlog with us. We are sort of getting eyes from Sri Lanka or someplace, and this is a shame for the country so big, and that we do not have people donating eyes. I think the family physicians can play a role in that by asking their patients to donate their eyes after death, so that somebody can benefit from it.
Is it correct that one cornea can correct 6 eyes? So it can
The cornea will be able to only correct one eye. Rather, one person, he has, if both the eyes are
One eye can give one eye.
Yeah, so one eye. But there are other parts which can be used. We can use sclera also. There are other parts that can be used in different parts to cure other things. Supposing if somebody has a staphylococcus or something, then that sclera of a donated eye can be used there to control that staphylococcus and prevent that person from becoming blind.
You cannot grow cornea from cornea and then.
Well, stem cells research is going on,
Yeah.
and if we are able to make artificial corneas, then nothing like it, then people would not be asking for a donation. You see, then there would be an eye bank where you will just put in your money and an eye would come out. I don't know, but that is future.
Maybe all the best to you for that. Because I'm sure in another few years it will be done. The way things are moving in the country and all over the world. So with these words, I think we thank Dr. Tandon and Dr. Khanna. I think he academically told everything a GP should know. That is most important part of this program, that we tell our GPs that what are the basic things they must know. We are not going to make you specialists in that, but definitely these were the things which everyone.
No, I would love competition from GPs also, but then they should be correct as far as their treatment is concerned.
Thank you, doctor.
I,
Thank you, sir.